Guys, I don't mean to alarm you, but I think we might be getting attacked by omniphobia. What are we gonna do? Oh, he's dead. I think he was here and then he kind of just died. Hello, my fellow Stormweavers. I am so excited to bring you the latest and by far greatest upgraded version of our Ball Lightning Warp combo. And now the upgraded version. If you're getting some deja vu right now, you're not weird for thinking so. This is going to be a quite literal update to the last build that I released, where we have converted to a bunch of delicious cast-on synergy while still keeping the build cheap to get online and ludicrously powerful. Still using that double shock magnitude lightning conduit one-shot for millions upon millions of damage in a single hit, but now automatically and smoothly. In any case, what you have today then is the same core explanation of what's going on that I shared a few days ago, so people who just find this can understand, with some much needed updates, information and upgrades based on what I've done since and some questions you guys have asked. So, we have made the actual size of the Lightning Nova colossal, which just makes everything super comfortable. But that is just the smallest of starts. We've made ourselves nigh unkillably immortal by having permanent massive amounts of energy shield coming in, doubling our total for free all the time and constantly being refreshed. Past that, as you watch a tier 16 juiced breach in the background, you will notice that comets are falling. You will notice that Lightning Conduit is going off. We have got both cast on crit going all in on crit chance, and cast on shock now actually generating enough energy to be more than excellent. And before you even worry, no, this is not expensive. You don't even need a chest piece with spirit on it. I don't have any here. All we are doing is swapping our focus out for a scepter, because it unlocks the secret source. Not only does it give us an absolutely massive amount of spirit, I'm sat here with 282, so I can activate all of the things, and again, this scepter was about 25 exalted orbs. Like, that is so cheap compared to a 60 spirit chest, which can be like 10 divine orbs. In any case, this lets us do a lot, but what it also does is give us malice, which consistently makes every enemy easier and easier to crit, which just fuels the whole, cast on crit that we're now working in. So we have malice rolling, we cast on crit, which summons a comet, which nukes everything. We cast on shock, which then does lightning conduit, which one-shots everything. And that means that we no longer, as I say, have to manually cast it ourselves. Everything happens automatically from this ridiculous ball lightning teleport spam. And yes, the size of the explosions. And because we're stacking area of effect, that also affects the size of the comets coming down. So they're also screen wiping one-shots. Even though they're ice damage, it still gets amped massively by the build. And bosses? Well, here's a +2 We Who Are One pinnacle boss, very comfortably easy, and then a series of various T15 to T18 map bosses getting absolutely detonated. Of course, it's not the instant literal lightning conduit manual cast one tap, but it's pretty damn close, and it's also a lot better because we don't have to stack on one spot, slowly set up all of your buff layers, and then do this slow cast, and a lot of the time that can get you in trouble. It's much better, especially once you start getting to very high pinnacle, to actually be able to play a bit more normally, moving around the room, doing your lightning warp explosions, and just letting the comets and conduits coming out from your cast-ons cleave the boss down. It is super comfortable, and the main reason I made this switch is because I wanted something that could better happen your simulacrum, your breaches. You could have all of the one-shotting power in the world on on your conduit, but if you're getting swarmed by endless rares that happens once you start really amping those league mechanics, you just can't really do anything. You need that extra little spice to cleave through waves of enemies, and having this automatic both conduit and meteor setup is really just a brilliant solution, at least in my humble opinion. We work it into all the various little changes to the skill tree and skill gems we've made, and as I said, we now have Grim Feast, which gives us colossal amounts of energy shield restoration for every enemy we kill, which makes us incredibly tanky, and we are looking absolutely peachy. And I'm sure you've been seeing it in all of the gameplay in the background. You're seeing the constant comets coming down, the massive explosions just killing everything, the lightning conduit going off and just zapping rares to death in one go without ever having to stop, just moving forward and spam teleporting along the maps with your lightning warp ball lightning in front of you. This is just beautiful, and the potential of it is absolutely unreal. I genuinely believe it has the ability to reach even past Spark at its peak, but that requires, 200 Divine Orbs worth of gear, so really not exactly realistic, whereas this version here is certainly realistic, and one that I'm very happy to share with you. It's not like I have a crazy amount of currency either, so to feel this powerful and make everything so comfortable both offensively and defensively, and just in playing it, because having everything cast on based is just super smooth as well, yeah, I am really, really enjoying it. We keep our blink tech as well, having it on our second weapon set so we can still teleport, and just being able to stack so many spirit-based passives for all of the fuel here is really more than worth the loss of the damage from the focus being replaced by a scepter. So without further ado then, let's get into the nitty-gritty here, starting with your skills. Actually, as usual, I will do the quick little what's the minimum before transitioning to this version of the build, and essentially at least 4,000 mana. This can be quite mana hungry because you're auto-casting Lightning Conduit and Comet, which can really eat through your blue, even if you do have a good amount of regen, and I would hardly recommend that that regen is at least at the 800 mark. Other than that, all you need to make sure you have is probably, I'd say at least level 75-80 so you can get enough crit from the skill tree for cast on crit, and lastly at least 280 spirit or 250 if you don't care about using Grim Feast to get more barrier. And with that, don't swap to this until you have a scepter that gives you that amount of spirit and specifically has malice on it, which you want. Everything else we'll go over in the gear section, but that's kind of the baseline. There's no other super required gear or stat thresholds or anything like that, though as a general rule, you'll want to end up with your lightning warp on at least 20% crit chance, so I'm nicely over, but again, we'll talk about that more on the skill tree. Hopefully that does help. And then also when it comes to swapping to this, just to reiterate, we are using Chaos Inoculation and Mind Over Matter alongside Eldritch Battery. This amulet lets you have a good old energy barrier on despite having Eldritch Battery, which is converting all your energy barrier. You don't need this. Plenty of people transition to no longer having this and just a more offensively powerful neck, and they just have enough mana that it doesn't matter. I'm not quite there yet, so I'm still using it, but this is just a comfort thing. It doesn't need to be there, it just helps a lot. Other than that, we are using Chaos Inoculation, so we go to 1 health. This makes us immune to chaos damage. This is awesome because you can just stand in a load of things that otherwise you couldn't. Also, fun fact, poison and bleed count as chaos. Poison was known, but you can't also get bled. If you're ever doing any activity and there's a negative that it's like, monsters will bleed or poison you, take it because it's completely free. Same with monsters will do bonus chaos damage. Being on 1 health doesn't matter because I have have 2000 shield, which can go up to 4k with Grim Feast, and 4600 mana, so that's nearly 10k effective health, which is more than making up for the poxy amount of life I would have, at the great benefit of being immune to chaos damage, the most irritating type of damage in the game. And then this is complemented by, yes, mind over matter, so we can take damage from our mana. Don't swap to mind over matter until you have at least 3000 mana, and until you have at least 500 mana per second regen with mind over matter on, and then you'll start to feel really tanky. So first up, you have got Malice then from the Scepter, as we just talked about. Make sure it is Malice and you have that active. You can tell because you've got the little red glowing line around you. If I swap to my other weapon set, that will go away because it's no longer active. Talking of that other weapon set, on weapon set 2, you want to have a staff for Sigil of Power, so you can plop that down and just do a boatload more damage, up to a good near 50%. This is also the weapon set that you want to have conductivity on, because you will also have blink on this weapon set. So if you click this little arrow, just make sure that 2 is ticked and not 1 on conductivity, blink, and your Sigil of Power. That way you can still actually do the blink tech by quickly using your conductivity, and then off we go. That makes things a lot smoother. Everything else you want to make sure is very specifically just on 1 and not 2, like my Lightning Warp is here. So, yes, Malice, Sigil of Power on your weapon sets, that's all good. We'll go back to weapon set 1, where you want to have Cast on Crit. Then you want to give it Comet, and you want to amp that up with Echo, so you get double Comet when it comes down. You want to Inevitable Crit it, so it's more likely to crit, and then really amp up that critical damage bonus on it. Getting 5 is obviously nice, but I want to keep this relevant to, you know, us mere mortals that can't be doing a full 6 link on everything. Then your archmage just on. If you are lucky enough to have a level 20 archmage, then make sure this gets the +1 level support, otherwise it's not too important. But what is important is quality. Make sure you get archmage to 20% quality with your gem cutter's prism. The same on cast on critical, as that 10% reduced reservation that it does is really good, alongside the other effects too. It really does help, as it does on Cast on Shock, quality to +20%, so we gain an extra 15% energy, so we get 15% more frequent lightning conduits. Then in Cast on Shock, which you want, and on, of course, you want the lightning conduit. Then we want it to happen 40% faster, and then we will give it considered casting, which is just a 40% damage amp, as the cast speed doesn't matter with cast on, and then here for another 40% more damage for less effect, because it still reaches massively far away. Then we could just give it any kind of generic damage up, like 25% more damage but it can't apply shock would be the obvious choice for the final one. Then you've got your Grim Feast, make sure that's just on, and again, quality is very nice here because it just gives more energy shield. How this works is half the enemies you kill will leave behind a little white spirit, you'll pick it up just accidentally moving around, and then that'll give you 172 energy shield, which can go up to double your energy shield amount, and it's a huge boon for survivability. It's the most optional part of this, but it really does help. Blink we've gone over. Conductivity on your second weapon set, you want Heightened Curse so it's stronger, and you want Focus Curse so it comes out faster, and then Hex Bloom so it spreads if you ever feel like using it on random enemies. Then the actual Lightning Warp itself, that I have now got the full 5 on. Really tried my best to farm that, because it is of course our main ability. We want to have 75% more magnitude of shock with it. We want to have Lightning Exposure get applied by that sweet shocked ground. We want it to cost 40% less, because we are already spending so much mana in this build and it just needs it. Then we want it to be 40% larger for those big explosions. And then finally we will amp up the exposure even more to really plummet the enemy's lightning resist and amp our damage. Finally then, we have Ball Lightning, the main engine, the cast out and then teleport on top of it, and we have the following. Unleash, so we just throw more of them out. Scattershot, so we throw more of them out. Then Wild Shards, so we throw more of them out, so every 1 in 5 cast will be this big ring around us, which gives us more options to teleport around the place and can really help when you're in a small corridor and otherwise Ball Lightning gets eaten by geometry. It also means in you're surrounded by enemies, this ring of Ball Lightnings can go along, shocking everyone to actually trigger cast on shock quite quickly. Finally then, we have Arcane Tempo, so we can pull them out 25% faster, so we're not just stuck being stunned by melee enemies while we try and cast this slow cast. It really speeds up the build. Then, yes, we still have Mana Tempest for when you really feel the need to use it, and we give it Premeditation, so it's stronger, and currently the +1 that will go to Archmage when I have a level 20 Archmage. It's not as needed in this version of the build, because we're just automatically cast on Shocking, and you won't be stood in your Tempest as much, but it still can be useful, so it is there. Another few little tips and tricks and notes on your skill gems. For your cast on crit, I know I mentioned it, but the quality is what lets you have that reduced reservation, which is why I can have everything on with 280 spirit when it should cost a little bit more than that. Make sure you quality up every single one of your spirit consuming passives. Talking of spirit and getting more of it with more passives, you want to do the following. This is your Arcanist Etcher. It will up the quality of your scepter, and upping the quality will increase the amount of spirit on it. So if I take this all the way to 20%, I initially had 184 spirit, and here we are, 20%, we now have 218 spirit. Which now actually means we have an extra 30 spirit to play with. Now, we can use this to do one of two things. We can either put in, and this is what I recommend, Clarity for an extra 30% increased mana regen. It will help a lot. You can put it into either Archmage or Grim Feast, it doesn't matter which, and if I have a look, I currently have 843 mana regen, and we'll whack this into Grim Feast, and now we're up to 896, which is a nice, good little plus 50 chunk, and you do notice it. You also, if you prefer, can instead get yourself mana remnants and put that on, which basically makes enemies drop the mana equivalent of Grim Feast, so that can help your survivability too, whichever you prefer. As for how to play this then, let's use a quick in-game example, this fight against the +2 Breach Pinnacle boss. As you can see, we make sure the ground is painted in our shock terrain before he spawns. This will immediately apply and keep reapplying the 2 stacks of shock from our ascendancy. You'll see it flicker on and off on his health bar throughout the fight. This is good, because we have ourselves low shock duration, thanks to both ascendancy and other talents. It will keep falling off of him and then being reapplied, therefore powering up our cast on shock. If we have a look at the top left throughout the fight, you can see cast on shock rotating through fairly quickly. Each time that reaches 100%, we hit him with the potent Lightning Conduit, which will chunk him away in 2-3 hits. We also then see cast on crit. That's slowly, well, I say slowly, fairly quickly getting up to 100%. If you don't know, the cast on energy-based skills give you way more percent for hitting a boss than they do like a normal white trash, which is why it becomes so effective, as they essentially don't feel nerfed against bosses. So you just want to use your balls in a circle to teleport around the boss. Use the actual lightning warp to teleport to a safe ball lightning based on the boss's mechanic, dodge around him, blasting him with the explosions, which do really hurt, as the shock ground keeps auto reapplying shock, triggering cast on shock for Lightning Conduit, and then the raw crits of your explosions will trigger your cast on crit for Comet, which honestly goes a long way towards freezing too, which is really, really helpful. You essentially just use the teleports to do the mechanics while letting everything else play out naturally, and every fight will be over in sub like 10 seconds anyway, so it's not like you have to think about this for long. Outside of that, against normal mobbing and maps, as you can see in this breach, you just want to keep spam throwing out your ball lightnings and teleporting them. Try and teleport to the ball lightning that's the furthest away from the densest group of enemies. You don't want to accidentally teleport into the middle of them and get maybe frozen or chain stunned to death. I will go over how to deal with stun and freeze later in this guide, but generally speaking, you want to sort of stay away from everything because we've made the size of the explosion so massive, it will just clip and cleave through the screen, so you just want to keep appearing in safe spaces. You don't really need to use Mana Tempest at any point, that's not a huge issue, and against bosses, you just want to put down your Sigil of Power as well before things get started, as we are pumping AoE, which increases that size too, and that'll just amp you up for the kill. And if you really want to, if it's particularly difficult, use your Curse of Conductivity to lower the resist of lightning on the boss even more, but that can be kind of overkill. The only real pitfall here is you've just got to be safe with your teleporting. Corridory type maps can be a little bit of an issue because they might eat your ball lightnings if it hits geometry awkwardly, but that's why we've got the big ring of them support gem on now, because it gives a much higher chance of that not happening. And once you reach a kind of minimum threshold of cast speed, which we can very cleverly get through the skill tree that I'll go over, the build plays fast enough that we're not too worried about not being able to, actually keep smoothly teleporting forward and blowing everything up. It's fairly straightforward to play, now we're just kind of automating it with the double casts on. And then past that, just keep an eye on your mana. Lightning Conduit and Comet cost a lot of mana. If you get a lot of triggers in a row, you can really drain your mana pool, so just deliberately stop casting for a little bit, let your mana regen cast up so you're healthy as your mana is your health, and then carry on. Skill tree time then, and we've made quite a few changes to allow for the cast on crit support, so let's get into that. We start similar to how we always do, getting our energy shield on the right. Of course, the energy shield nodes applying to the energy shield gained from the Azure Amulet, which is important, but we continue on pure energy, then to dampening shield, stopping by mana blessing, and then up we go. Here then, you will see a lot of +5 strength nodes. The reason is, in order to wield this scepter, you need to have 54 strength, so we have to get that strength from somewhere, and if you don't have it on your gear, like I don't, you need to get it on your tree, so be aware of that. Either have it on your gear, or have it from your tree, and that's all well and good. My scepter itself gives 27 to int, so at least 5 of these are technically replaced, but that's how it is. In any case, we now no longer have the spare points to go over here. We don't need this extra little bit of magnitude of shock. It is kind of overkill, and it just saves us too many points to be able to do other things, though I really wish I could still get it. In any case, we head up. Initially, we want to veer right up here, where we will grab 8% more area of effect, and then 30% more area of effect. This is literally just 46% bigger lightning warp and comet explosions, which is huge. More than worth the damage reduction, let me tell you. This build just gets better and better and better the larger your area of effect gets. So now we want to head all the way up here at this little crossroads. We're going to initially go right. We've got a little bit of dex here because you need to make sure you do have enough dex to actually use all your support gems. And actually, I've just realized in the middle of this that this could be intelligence. I forgot that I have 1 dex less on my gem, so hey, that's quite nice. In any case, we continue on, get to the gem slot, and finally we reach here. Then we go up and we get Eldritch Battery, of course, to amp our mana, and then, talking of amping our mana, we get Arcane Intensity, followed by Raw Mana, and then we head up here to this intelligence, branching right to get 25 extra intelligence, and then also going up for some more critical hit chance with spells, 25% more on controlling magic. Go left to grab the jewel slot, and then up into here, where we want to get both pure power for that huge damage amp, and power conduction for that magnitude of shock. It's really, really good for just 3 points to grab it. Then we want to keep heading left all the way until we finally end up at Chaos Inoculation, and we want to grab that. that, get that 1 health but immune to chaos damage, coupled with mind over matter, it really does make you very, very tanky. Then we arrive at here, where we're going to branch up and get Careful Assassin, because 50% critical hit chance is really good. The reduced damage bonus doesn't matter, because we're going to get that back from other nodes, and this really ups the consistency of cast on crit. Then we keep on going down here just to get to this next gem slot, and as I level up and get more points, I'm currently level 89, I would go back down here and refill out this until I get Wild Storm once more. That's where your next points go if you do have more than me. Then we want to go all the way back to this initial fork, and we are going to head left through the gem slot until we get here, initially going up straight away to Mind Over Matter, then into here to get Touch of the Arcane to really amp that Arcane Surge that we have permanently on from the Ascendancy, then up to this Jewel slot, and then down to here. We want to go up for 3% cast speed, but then this, 20% increased cast speed. Now, I have tested this, and while normally being on 1 health from Chaos Inoculation doesn't count as low life, it does, for some reason, work with Final Barrage. If I spam cast Lightning Warp, I run out of mana in 20 seconds without this, and in 13 seconds with this, because that 20% cast speed is applying. So, hey, until this gets fixed, let's take advantage of a free 26% attack speed for just 3 points. It's a huge quality of life, really speeds up the build, really helps. Then we go back to this intelligence, heading up into here, grabbing more magnitude of shock, grabbing the elemental damage and resist, and then up here for the crit chance and the massive 40% more damage if we've crit recently, which we always will be doing. Then we go finally over to this jewel slot, where we will ideally put our time loss diamond for more % increased mana, but whatever is here, we still get the same points around it, which is to say more area damage and repulsion, and then more area of effect as we go around here for another 20% size of explosions. Then we're going to go up here, going all the way right, more energy shield and mana, and then all the way left to get some much needed stun threshold, and this +5 all attributes is actually really nice too. Then finally we're going up for critical damage and getting desensitization for even more critical damage bonus to undo Careful Assassin, and eventually I will fill in both these points just to get the 1% increased mana per, as it really is that useful. Over to the Ascendancy, nothing has changed. You want your Strike Twice for double shocks, you want your Constant Gale and Force of Will for that lovely Arcane Surge scaling, and then finally Scouring Winds for another 20% exposure. An issue that will come up is sometimes you will get surrounded by a horde of enemies and then chain stunned to death. You can also get slightly grazed by frost and frozen in place, and that sucks. So you have some potential solutions. This stun threshold as your energy shield is really, really good, and I found that this by itself is kind of just enough, but if you want, you can take points out and go up to here to get even more stun threshold and a little bit of mana while you're at it. You can peel away some damage, like from here, or drop the cast speed, or just have more points than me. On the freeze side of things, if you're really struggling, you want to come down here and invest 4 points into freeze and chill resistance before finally getting Icebreaker. This will make you essentially nigh unfreezable, or you can do what I've done, which is, and I'll go over this in the jewel section, have a Time Lost Diamond here that gives 5% reduced freeze duration per small passive in range. And given that I have got 6, 9, 10, 12, 14, yeah, that's a lot of reduced freeze duration, and I found that this is enough for me, so I've not spent the points over here, but it is something to consider. So, your jewels then. In every single slot, ideally, what you want is 10% increased area of effect, 20% increased magnitude of shock. After that, it's just anything useful you can grab. Cast speed, lightning damage, mana regen, extra energy barrier. They're your tertiary ones, but ideally you want area of effect and 20% increased magnitude of shock. I've not managed to get one for literally every single one yet, but it is what I am slowly working towards. And yes, ideally, if you can, you want to get an Against the Darkness Time Lost Diamond that has passive skills give 1% increased maximum mana, as this is responsible for a huge amount of our mana. So, that is your skill tree. Now, eventually, we can actually do a lot more with our jewels. If you specifically grab yourself a high roll adorned diamond, what this will do is massively amp your magic jewels that are corrupted. So for example, if you got something like this, 10% increased area of effect, you successfully Varlorbed and corrupted it, kept the area of effect, well now this would be amped by that 100% to result in massive area of effect. The same as something like this that still gives you the 20% magnitude of shock we need, but amped by the diamond. So in the perfect world, you could have yourself an adorned diamond, and then every other jewel slot a corrupted magic jewel that gives shock magnitude and area of effect, and then you'd be really rolling. Obviously, this is going to take a while, and it's a very expensive upgrade, but it is something worth pointing out. Over to gear then. Of course, your weapon set to any given staff with Sigil of Power, that's all well and good. And then the meat of it. The important thing is a scepter that gives at least 180 spirit, including the % increased spirit, with malice on it. All the other bonus stats you can get that help are nice, maximum mana and intelligence being the main ones. After that, you want to make sure that you are res-capped. I say not res-capped. I've not managed to find the gear to actually cover me swapping to the scepter, as my focus did give me a good amount of res, but as you've seen, all the footage in this video is with me not res-capped, and everything is still comically easy, so you can push it a little bit, but ideally you do want to be res-capped. Then you want to have as much energy shield on every item that you can get. This translates to mana from Eldritch Battery, and that scales everything, Archmage, Arcane Tempo, and so on and so forth. Past that, you want ranks to lightning skills to spell skills, pure % spell damage is extra X damage, and then we're back to just hoovering up mana. Raw maximum mana, intelligence, and mana resist are all going to do you well. Make sure you get as much movement speed up to 35% on your boots when you can, and generally as much magic find. Sadly, rarity of items on your gear until that gets changed, but the more you can get, the significantly easier your experience is going to be. That about covers it in affixes you're looking out for. And just to talk a little bit more about the sockets of what's going to go in your gear, well, if you're not res-capped, ideally you should use your lightning, your fire resist, which is a little bit awkward because it locks it in place and makes your gear a lot less flexible, which is why I've resisted doing it with my boots so far, and that's all well and good. If you can, though, you want this, the Soul Core of Xalatl, for 2% more maximum mana. Ideally, this can go in your helmet, your gloves, and your boots. In your chest, you still want to put an Iron Rune for 20% more energy shield, as that translates to more mana, and that will get you sorted real nice. You also want to be using your Neural Catalyst to improve the quality of your ring's mana modifiers, as well as your amulet. It will increase your max mana and your mana regen, which is really, really nice to have. You can use other catalysts to get specific stats that you're after too, but mana is quite the safe bet. Uniques-wise, then, you want to be getting a Midnight Braid Rawhide belt just for the mana regen recoup. Eventually, of course, you want this to be the Belt of Ingenuity, just as eventually you want this to be the % maximum mana ring, the Dream Fragments, but you know, that's well and truly out of our reach at the moment, at least for me. What isn't, though, is the Everlasting Gaze that you want so that you maintain a barrier despite having Eldritch Battery. It's a very, very big deal, and you want to instill Frazzled on it so we get more mana regen and shock magnitude using your emotions to do that. And that is that. Lastly, to expand on future chase level uniques, you want to ideally get yourself a Dream Fragment Sapphire Ring. The % increased mana is, of course, ludicrously good, as is the You Can't Be Chilled or Frozen, which is just a beautiful quality of life. Once you have this, you want that Belt of Ingenuity to amp the Sapphire Ring via its huge amp, which is even more mana. Those two would really polish this off, but but of course that's like a cool 120 plus divines worth of investment, so we'll get there eventually. Maybe. If I ever do get them, I'll show you the result, because it's quite spectacular. You'll end up on like 7-8k mana, which is just ridiculous, both damage and survivability. Other than that then, we have reached the end of this build guide. This new Scepter Spirit-focused, multiple cast-on version of Lightning Warp with massive area of effect baked in that just makes everything so much smoother, faster, and easier than before, while maintaining that big boss one-shotting capabilities, but really amping up your ability to cleave through mass wave mechanics like Breach. I'm really proud of this one, really happy with it, and I hope you enjoy it too. For now, like if you have indeed enjoyed it, subscribe for more, and hit the bell. Consider supporting the future of this channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.